item 11E, recommendation, consideration and action upon approval of agreement with Finco Geodemographics LLC for 2017.
This was, recommendation comes following an RFP for demographic services, and recommendation after review of the submittals was to employ Finco Geodemographics, and Alan Fincham is here from Finco. If you guys have questions or anything of him about the scope of work that he will be performing for our district. Alan, you want to come up?
I mean, I think our proposal was pretty straightforward, so.
I do have one question.
Sure.
The financial projection analysis, you indicate that Finco will provide services for student growth up to 5 years, which will include 1-2% increases in the kindergarten class for each subsequent year of the study period. So I guess I was a little surprised to see that. Are you already making some assumptions on the growth rate in those areas?
Well, that's kind of a standard. We probably, based on what I just heard, we might cut that back a little.
But
42 for the whole district's a pretty small number.
But I'm assuming that part of your work will be to try and make a more accurate prediction there.
Yeah,
or
oh
you
yeah.
Just...
That's an estimate of what we would do. I mean, when we did, locally we've done Stillwater and we've done Jenks. And we've done a number of population projections in Missouri that aren't entirely valid for this situation because some are suburban Kansas City. So it'd be like estimating Edmond or something. But most of the districts around here, especially the smaller ones, tend to be growing at about that rate or staying relatively stable. So we tend to have a stable and then a 1 and a 2 so that you as a board and Dr. Simpson can decide which one best fits your needs, is what we try to just give you 2 or 3 options so that as the period goes on, you can feel somewhat comfortable with what's coming. And based on the 42 number, what's the total enrollment?
We're right at 3,400.
3,400, so 1.5%. That's, yeah.
Okay, tell me how you take your crystal ball and determine growth. I mean, a year ago, not a single one of us would have been able to determine that out at Forest Hill Roads and Sooner that there was going to be this housing addition that's going in that's going to be mammoth. I mean, how do you determine that? How do you determine, how do you work with the free and reduced lunches? I mean, how do you do this?
It's just, haven't done it a bunch of times for Stillwater. I mean, we've done this 5 times for Stillwater and population estimates. And we've done rezoning for their elementary schools 3 times. And it's just kind of having a feel for what the state's doing, but it's also, you can't entirely guess on something like that. If you have some indication something's coming, then you play it in. We also have found problems in census data. The census projects this out too, not the federal census, but then you have to tweak on that because in Jenks they kept thinking they would have 100 more kids than they were seeing. Well, they were putting growth in where Oral Roberts is. And that's a bunch of young women who, under more normal circumstances, you would predict would be high growth. You know, they'd have lots of kids. But they don't, because it's a college. You know, you don't see growth of elementary school population there. And it's just growth in the state in its general has hovered between 0.5% and 1.5% for about the last 10 years. Now, a large subdivision, you don't know that till it happens. You're right. There's no way to absolutely know that. It's just trying to ferret it all out as you go.
Okay, and so you've done this, and just tell me what happens. Because it will happen in our South County with our new school. Kids are going to start going to that school, and we're going to have growth out there. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah,
And in 2 years, all of a sudden, a bunch of those kids who are going to that school aren't going to qualify to go to that school anymore. I know you've seen that happen. Tell me, just out of curiosity, what happens in the community when it happens?
Qualify to go to that.
Because there's going to be more additions,
growth. Well,
out there, and
actually-
so they're going to get moved out of that school. How does this community react to that? I just want to know, because it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen.
It's not always pretty. I've gotten some pretty nasty phone calls in Stillwater.
I mean, we as a board, I just want to know how we're going to prepare for that, because we know it'll happen.
Oh yeah, it'll happen. Our hope is I would probably try to build your zone for that school in particular to expect a lot of growth. My son lives in Edmond, and so I know what's going on down there. And we're right over the border, so the growth is spilling over into this county to some extent and into this district. And I would expect we'd probably put a 3% growth on that one too, just to see what it looked like, and probably project our line on that one to make sure you stayed under capacity for the building. That's through the 4 to 5 years that this plan would be good for. You're going to have to rezone that schools every 3 to 5 years anyway. I mean, that's if you're going to do schools like Dr. Simpson explained to us, which is different than you've done in the past. You're going to tinker with them. If you don't, you're going to end up with a problem that led to nasty phone calls to my house in Stillwater, because we had a school that had 685 students assigned to it in a building with 510 seats. And because they didn't rezone schools for 20 years, because it was a political nightmare and nobody wanted to deal with it. And I dealt with it, and I heard about it. And I had people claiming I was doing it for my own kids. My son was 21 years old at the time. I didn't care. It didn't make any difference to me. But that's just something you got to live with. It's going to happen. When you have to zone kids out of a newer school, you're going to take their parents off. That's life. Now, what you can do is grandfather in the kids that are there, and this is what I've seen happen in several districts that we've talked to, is the kids that are there, you try to grandfather them in, but don't let any others come from outside the district. The other thing is, and we've worked with districts that don't do this very well, is making kids stick to the lines. In Stillwater, they let 20% of the students move. It makes my job very, very, very hard.
In-district transfers, correct, from one elementary to another.
Yeah, and it's maddening, because I can't account for that. The other thing I can't account for in Oklahoma is homeschooling, because they're not required to tell us how many, nobody has to turn that in. The parents don't. And so I don't know how many kids that we think live in your district aren't coming to your school except based on your enrollment. And so projecting for that's kind of difficult too.
That's one of the questions I had was, I'm sure I know there's a large population of homeschool, private school students in the south part of the county. How how can you measure the impact that new school will have on recruiting some of those students? So do you make any attempt to do that at all?
I think if you're talking about parents who are sending their kids to religious schools, it's not going to make much difference. If you're talking about parents who are doing it because they didn't want to drive their kid up here, okay, maybe, but that's hard to tell. We probably run primarily off the total possible enrollment for our primary numbers.
As part of my, some of my questions surrounding this study is, that's an unincorporated part of the county. There's no zoning. I would think that makes it a little more challenging trying to predict the growth. We all know growth is going to continue to accelerate. And it probably will accelerate exponentially based on the new school being there. So are you able to measure that? Because
my experience is that doesn't really happen as much as you think.
Okay.
Stillwater built 2 new schools, and they haven't seen much change in their districts.
Okay.
Now that's built-in bias on schools. I think it will happen in your district to some extent, but I think the growth will be the growth, because people still have to buy houses and move in the area. And if they can't afford to, or they don't want to move to that part of town, they're not going to go there, or that part of the district. They're not going to. Now the question, and I think one divider you have is that line between your district and Edmond. And how many people, when growth occurs, are they going to want to stay on the Edmond side of the line, or are they going to come on this side of the line? That's a big question mark. We've done a little work for Edmond, not in this area, and I don't think they expect to lose students, to be honest.
So then as you look at the district as a whole, I assume then you will be looking at each future neighborhood school, and then you try to accurately predict the growth model for those
that
areas
school.
And then design the boundaries based on that?
Yes, and I would probably, to be honest, I think we would be pretty conservative with that school down there because of growth. I think that's where your growth is. I don't think you're going to have much of any up here.
And see, that's I guess one of the reasons I've kind of questioned the need for your services is we know that's where the growth is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're going to have any in town, but I guess you attempt to answer that question then.
We try. And a lot of it's based on experience, having done this before. A lot of it's based on the population projections we've done, not only in Oklahoma, for a number of districts, but in other states as well, and watching their growth. And I would be shocked if your growth in that part of your district was more than 3%. I really would.
Another item.
Unless you're telling me they're going to build 600 houses down there and they're going to be lower income houses. Because if they're not lower middle income houses, that's not starter homes, that's not little kids, that's not elementary school kids. If you're talking about upper middle income houses, those tend to be junior high and high school kids. People whose careers are a little more set, they make a little bit more money, and so they're not sending their kids to elementary school, they're sending their kids to one of your other schools.
How does your proposal, when you talk about stabilization or equalization of free and reduced lunches, how do you draw a line based on a socioeconomic group?
Well, we know the income level of every block group in this district. We'll have that. That's not a problem. And I mean, it's a generalization, obviously. Not everybody that lives in the zone fits the demographic of the average, but they're pretty good guesses of where people are that are going to be free and reduced lunch and where they're not. And we also take the past trends of your school. We'd like to have as much data backwards as you have for your district so that we could see how many students you had and where they lived, if we can get that. And that helps us say, okay, what's this going to look like going forward? Not entirely. I think that's a special case down there that we're going to have to play with a little bit.
But I think to your point, Alan, the other part of this that really supports what he just said, one of our greatest areas of growth has quietly been on the west side of town with some housing that has been built designed for lower income families. And we see that, obviously not with how we parcel out our students right now, but we see that with the transportation shuttles, where we are shuttling kids in growing numbers to the west side of town, to Cotterill. And Mr. Graham has had to handle that load as it has grown in the 5 years that he and I have both been in the district. And I think that is something to...
Well, that's a telling story that I was not entirely aware of, but obviously since we hadn't started yet. But yeah, if you've had a large lower income housing, you got to think about transportation too. That's the other thing we try to bring into the gauge is transportation from the standpoint of your buses. And we don't pick your routes. I'm not trying to get to that, but for each school, what are the roads that would feed that school? How would people either get their kids there themselves, or how would the buses move around in that zone? The biggest change we've created on a district is Jenks just opened a new school about half a mile from where I told him to put it about 4 years ago. And the reason I told them to put it where I did was because they were going to bus kids across the river. If you're not aware, the Arkansas River runs through the middle of their district. And it was the first elementary school that was going to bus kids across the river. And I said, 71st Street Bridge is one you don't use much. And that's a nice, wide, high-capacity bridge, and you're going to be working against it, against the natural flow, because in the morning you're going to be coming west, and the commuters are going to be going east. And so you're not even going to be in the traffic jam. All you need is a red light wherever your school is, so that your buses can turn. And that, yeah, they did what we told them, and they seemed to be pretty happy with it. So, but ultimately, I'm not, could you do this yourself? Yeah. Politically, do you want to do this yourself, or do you want to blame me, the nameless company? So that and there's no phone number for FinCo Geodemographics, so, but people figure out who it is. But I think that's part of what some school districts want, is they want somebody else to blame. I'm not going to lie.
You really believe that that's the case?
Yes. I think that's part of the case. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think they bring in people who've done this before because they're concerned that they may miss something. But I think they're also trying to, you guys are elected.
Okay,
That's the other part of the question. The reason I was asking you that is because I have been asking people about this, and their responses, whether it was the 15,000 or not, was the political issue of it.
Yes.
That there is a political side to this too. That there's does the board want to take the full responsibility of this, or do they want an outside opinion? And I was very surprised that the people I talked to said you really need to think about whether you really probably want an outside opinion on this, and don't, for your own sakes as a board. And that really surprised me that I heard people tell me that, okay? I wasn't, the crystal ball, I still don't understand how you can do this, okay?
Well,
and that's, I wasn't trying to be sarcastic.
Spend 3 hours
how do you do it? That brings up my other question. I have to ask it now. Do you think we're going to open the school next year? Because that's whether we need to be worried about this yet or not. I'm sorry, but that's still got to be a question that we need to be asking.
I'm looking at our construction.
I mean, I got to be honest with you. If this is not an issue, if we don't think we're going to be close to be ready or not.
I guess the last thing I wanted to hear was the boards make these decisions in order to dodge.
I'll give you options. You pick them.
And quite frankly, that's what we are elected for. I don't like. I'll take the bullets. And so what I'm looking at, struggling, is I want you to give a good value proposition of why we should have this demographic study, not so that you can give me political cover. I don't need that.
I don't.
And so now I'm really got a bad feeling about this, quite frankly. The board, we are at a stage of trying to develop our next long-range plan.
Yeah.
And as we do that, we need very good statistical data on where the growth is going to be, where the classrooms need to go. That's what I'm after. I don't want to hire you to give me cover.
Well, I'm not. When I said that, I don't mean it exactly like that. But I think some boards want that. But I also want to give you the best data we can find and the best data set we can put together to show you where the growth would be. Now, I do think your district is unique because you're going to have this one school down there that's going to be in a block. And then you're going to have these other 3 up here. And basically, it's going to be some sort of pie out from those. I haven't looked at the map several times since this started. I'm thinking it's going to be, you might have 5 or 6 variants of the pie, but it's going to be pies.
One thing about,
unless you plan to move some schools.
You guys as a board know that I'm not afraid to take a bullet or two, but I've never done this before. And that's why I thought as a district, and Dee's never done this before, and Dee and I have been working on this for 5 years now, trying to see what our capabilities were. And that's where I landed, was I felt like we needed some help on that so that we can get it right. Now, to Janae's question, Charles, this is Charles Wash. He's with W.L. McNabb.
I'll move over here. I think he's your political problem now.
Charles,
Thank you for answering my
just
question.
if you can help us on this discussion, and then maybe we can turn to the change order and stuff when we get to that part of the agenda. But, okay. Do you want to?
We will and still have been pushing to give you that school by the start of next school year. We've run into some obstacles that some very uncommon circumstances.
Weather.
So we're forcing through them as fast as we can and are back up and rolling. It did put us a little bit behind, but we found some areas where we can push some speed back up. So start of next school year is still doable. It is going to be very, very tight. And I'm not going to make any bones about that one. But our plan to this date is still going to be to get it to you by the start of school.
I just feel that, his services are going to take 3 months. So I don't know, and with the 35 rain days that we've had on construction, I mean, maybe this is something we just need to table and think about. And just that way we might have a better sense time-wise where we're at. It's not going to take him that long to do the study if we do the study. And it gives us a little bit more time just to kind of absorb this. Because I honestly wasn't expecting that large of a fee amount for that when we know where our growth is going to be right now. So I don't know, I think maybe it's something we need to table.
And I can tell you that I would vote no now, because there's not a thing in the world I'm going to do to hire for cover.
Well,
I just can't do it. I don't want to do it, and I won't do it. And I think if anybody does it for that reason, it's ridiculous. $15,000 could pay these people more money. And I'm going to vote no.
Mr. President, I make a motion that we table this till next meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Davis.
Yes.
Smedley.
Yes.
Salee.
Yes.
Pearson.
Yes.
Pennington.
Yes.
5 ayes, 0 nays.